So I'm going to talk on this video about why I don't have much respect for most of the traditional banks, but I do have a lot of respect for a lot of the challenger banks like Revolut and a lot of the digital banks. Now there's three reasons why I don't particularly like most private banks. Now number one, I think the private banks, at least the majority of them, are very slow when it comes to their processes and unnecessarily slow, and some of the things they come out with are just ridiculous. Now I'll give you an example. This week, without mentioning the name of the bank in question, I tried to make an investment into my investment account, but because, to cut a long story short, it's a new BIC and SWIFT code, they basically said to me, we can't recognize that. Now, after about 5 emails, they finally said to me, well, look, this does seem like a legitimate SWIFT and BIC code. And I said, of course it is. I can show you from this and this, right? They said, okay, well, that's great, but our system can't recognize it. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to overwrite that. And then they said to me, well, I'll tell you what, you're going to have to sign a declaration and we'll send it for you. I said, okay. I signed e-signature and they said, oh, we can't accept it for security. And I said to them, look, what's easier, to hack into my email, which has two-factor authentication, and do an e-signature? Or is it easier, I mean, let's face it, I could just say to my mum or my dad or anyone, look, this is my signature, do it for me. It's a nonsense. And anyway, if Revolut can do it, and if some of the biggest companies in the world like Amazon, Zoom, all these companies can do e-signature, why can't you do it? Are you honestly saying that you're better than those companies? Some of these financial institutions are bigger than you, and Amazon and all these companies are much bigger than you. Are you honestly saying your processes are better than theirs? And of course they couldn't answer that. You can imagine what they were saying, oh, I'm sorry sir for your complaint and all this nonsense, and then they put me to the complaints department or whatever. So it's this kind of nonsense that I don't like. And also linked to that, they kind of take advantage of their position in the market. Now what do I mean by that? It's human nature, the path of least resistance, to take the lazy option. So many people, if they bank with a company, they're more likely to invest with a company, even if it's more expensive, even if they're tied in. And you might say, well, that's fine. If someone has a HSBC account, but they're going to invest with HSBC, why not? That's fine. They might be more expensive than many, but that's fine. Yes, it is fine, but there's many sly techniques that the banks will use to keep money. I'll give you an example without naming any names. It's happened to me numerous times in the past where I've had a client who say bank with a big bank like HSBC. They become my client because they're not happy with, for example, the service or the fees of their bank. But then they'll send money from HSBC Bank, and HSBC very conveniently will put a hold on their bank transfer. In other words, they don't think it's fraudulent, but they'll say something like, oh, do you understand this? Do you understand that? They won't put a hold on many other things, but when it comes to other wealth management companies, they're more likely to put a hold. In other words, if you're a HSBC client, I don't know, HSBC Expat in Jersey, and you try to send money to another bank or indeed another advisory firm, they're more likely, very conveniently, to put a hold on that and say, oh, for security reasons, for anti-money laundering reasons. They'll come up with loads of excuses. They won't just come out there transparently and say, well, look, because we want your money, let's face it, we want your money. And that would be fine, right? Even if they came out and said, well, you know what, we don't want to lose you as a customer. We're very sorry you want to leave. I know you're only a banking client, not a wealth management client, but why don't you speak to our wealth management team? Instead, they come up with very sly ways to just make the process a bit more inconvenient for people to actually give their money to another company. But let's face it, if they said on day one, well, look, if you're going to become our banking client, we're going to try to upsell you to our wealth management division. And by the way, if you try to move money to another wealth management firm, we're going to make it as hard, or maybe we're going to make it as hard as possible for you to do it. Then people wouldn't bank with them. And finally, they just charge such ridiculous fees when it comes to a lot of wealth management products, and often what they do is they hide those fees. So whereas, say, an investment platform, you'll know the fees, say a firm like HSBC, what they'll often do is they'll say, oh, there's no fees for getting out and it's only 1.5%, but what they won't mention is you're only allowed to go into HSBC funds, as an example. So indirectly they're making it in many different ways. And you might say many firms do that in many different industries. They absolutely do, but I think the private banks are much worse than boutique companies and indeed firms in many other industries. So what I think is going to happen in the next 10 years, and I think lockdown has actually helped, is that the challenger banks Not just the big boys like Revolut, but all those challenger banks that are just pure banks, not wealth management, will get bigger. And those boutique firms that can specialize and really focus on an online niche also are going to get bigger. So as I mentioned in the video before, we've had many record months this year. And I think a lot of that has actually been because we've taken some clients off the banks. And this video actually illustrates some of the problems that people have had in the banking system.